Hello, and welcome to Educational Triage, where we discuss issues in alternative education. This is a discussion about teaching, by teachers, for teachers, and others who are interested in the alternative education world. We hope you find today's episode relevant, engaging, and useful. And if you do, please subscribe. I'm Tony Hunt, and I'm here to help guide you with the help of my friends Christy and Philip. And welcome back to another rousing edition of Educational Triage. I am here with my two favorite guides, Christy Goodell.
Hello.
And Philip Summers.
Aloha.
And this week we are taking on standardized testing. Why do we need to do standardized testing, and does it really tell us much of anything? So let's take a look at some of the statistics. Did you know that they are now testing pre-K kids?
Oh.
Pre-K students with standardized testing, because it's now a multi-billion-dollar business. And yeah, and
I did know that.
By the time that a student reaches 12th grade, they have already taken over 112 tests.
Wow.
112 tests?
112 standardized tests.
What's the breakdown on that?
K through 12.
I mean,
that I didn't. That I'm not really sure on.
Okay.
I can't really tell you what the exact figures are. These are figures that were thrown. It's in the book, The Assessment Industrial Complex.
So that's 9 tests a year. 112 tests, if you break that down.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
You know.
I've seen that.
Yeah, think about it.
Yeah.
So and the one of the premises of this book, the Assessment Industrial Complex, is that teachers no longer really teach, because everything is about teaching to the test, because you want to see those scores go up, because how are we funded? And it's basically on growth and those scores going up. My question is, what got us into that predicament where we lost sight of what we teach and we fall into a corporate lockstep where everything has to be guided by some sort of algorithm?
Mm-hmm.
So do we really, let's look at it first. Do we really need to have these tests, because teachers are teaching to the test? And is this something that we actually do need? Because the students in alternative ed don't necessarily test well in that. And we've talked about the lower reading scores. We've talked about declining math scores. But we also might be suffering from grade inflation, because we are starting to see more and more valedictorians with 4.0s. This week in our school, we had academic week, and we recognized people with 4.0s, and there were 258 students out of fewer than 2,000 students.
Wow. Wow.
Wait. So 4.0 in one school?
4.0 in one high school, 258.
Out of a graduating class of 500? No,
it was 1,000.
This is 9 through 12.
Oh, okay. I was like, what? Oh. That is crazy. Okay. Wow.
But still, that is more than 1/4 of the school has a 4.0.
Yeah.
So let's not tackle grade inflation per se, but let's take a look at, are these assessments really, what's going on? Are we doing grade inflation, or are the tests wrong? Are the tests not meeting the needs of the students in order for them to demonstrate what it is that they actually do know and what they actually do understand?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the 200 plus people who have a 4.0. That's amazing. Do you think that is because if you were in high school when COVID first started and so many courses were just kind of doing like pass, like you got credit for, but then the pass wouldn't figure into your GPA.
Right.
No,
So
it
is
wouldn't.
there's just less
It's a
grades
non-GPA.
being figured into your GPA? I wonder.
I don't know.
Be interesting
Well,
to compare that to previous years, like pre-COVID years, if that's like on pace or if it's I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent. That's just kind of
Well,
really
let me put it to you
surprising.
this. Well, here's the interesting thing. I was thinking because I was behind the academic week and I was trying to catch the numbers. And I was thinking because of COVID, we would bring the number down to 3.5 so we could get more kids. But that was but that brought us up to almost over 700 kids.
yeah.
And I thought, okay, I don't really have the budget for that.
Right. Oh my gosh.
So let's see what we can do with 3.75, and that brought it down a little bit. But then I went to 4.0, and there we had the 257. So it's absolutely amazing. But then on the other end, you have the kids who are around a 1.0 on the other end of the spectrum, and there are probably just as many of those between a 0.01% or 0.01 GPA all the way up through maybe a 1.5, say. So we have this huge gap that's there. So, but with standardized testing, are the students who have the lower end, are they really, is there an equity issue here for them?
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
so okay, because it seems to me that we perpetuate some sort of hierarchy where the kids with more money and more opportunity and more privilege are able to fare better with those tests, and then they go into the
Yeah.
university industrial complex per se.
Yeah.
And they just continue with this whole kind of thing. A student who can study for a long period of time can do well on these tests, where a student who doesn't test well may not be able to, but the one who doesn't test well may actually have more acumen in those areas than the student who tested very well.
Well, that's traditionally how the game's played anyway. I mean, when you look at the university system, that's the upper middle class. It started with the wealthy and the upper classes, and a way to kind of park the youth as such, the university systems and the prep schools and such. And then it became sort of more steadfast through the public school system and the preparation of workers. And then in the 20th century, the university systems began to train professionals with the expansion of knowledge and the expansion of the professions, of course. And now it's a system. I don't know. I kind of have the feeling it might become surpassed by just the expansion of knowledge itself and the internet. It because I think it's serving sort of a track. It's another way to succeed when it used to be the best way to succeed. I see that a lot in the high schools. It's saying, "Oh, what are you going to do for college? How are you going to go to college? When are you going to go to college?" But I don't see college as the way to go anymore. And it's always spoken at
Well,
high
that
school as the
pipeline
way to
actually
go.
starts at the
Yeah.
elementary level.
Well, absolutely. Actually, you're
Right.
right. It does, doesn't it? They're always pumping them full of that. You're going to college. You're going to college. But I'm seeing a world where
I'll
that's
pay for
not
your
necessarily
college if you do X, Y,
predetermined.
and
Yeah.
Z.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And
So
so we brainwash.
yeah, and it's the system that they're supposed to go into, but that's usually a system that's well suited for the upper classes. And so traditionally speaking, it's not equitable. Never was. You had to learn to play the game, and that's not necessarily the game anyway. I don't think.
And a lot of Right. And a lot of students will say, well, I have to go to college because that's my only way out of poverty.
It used to be, perhaps. It was the easiest way, perhaps, but it wasn't the most accessible or equitable way. Equitable way, no. And then
Or
you
the
Hmm.
most
test for that.
broadcast, like this is the best way.
Hmm.
Yeah. For a teacher, it was, or for a doctor, there was a way if you could scratch and claw, into the professions. It was a bona fide way in the middle of the 20th century. But, we've learned that the college education is almost more expensive. You can't hardly repay it in your lifetime now. It's kind of been reworked. It's a
Yeah.
Well,
really strange thing. I don't. It's
well,
hard to
it's
explain. And
because
then they teach, or they test for that, and that's where we're kind of running into maybe where it's exposed.
well, college that used to be an affordable secondary kind of education, and they're
Hmm.
saying, well, it should be free for students. Well, I believe that there needs to be some kind of a buy-in for it to be free, for it to be respected. Um, but that's just my thought. But college is unaffordable now. And so
Yeah.
you have the government, through some banks that of its choosing, is making these loans to students, and without any real financial preparation for them to take out these loans or real understanding of what's going on. But the universities themselves are charging for both kidneys, your heart, your lungs, and possibly the left cheek of your buttocks in order for you to go. So they can pay as many administrators as possible. So we see in the mainstream school system, we see this hoarding kind of culture of administrators. They're not hiring teachers, they're hiring more administrators, and the colleges are doing very much the same kind of thing. And so when you have all of these people who make a huge salary that's much higher than any of your teaching staff actually, and you have materials that are kind of in need, because there are different universities where the teaching staff has said, hold on, when are we going to get our money and so we can teach, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. um,
Hmm.
and universities have become big business because they're trying
Right.
to woo all these students. So have we gotten away from what education actually is, and are we doing I explain to me where we're going? I think, because I think maybe if we can figure out why we're doing what we're doing because of where we're going, maybe we get down to more of a root cause and a better place to be able to discuss a little bit more.
The educational industrial complex too.
Yeah.
I mean, if everybody wants to be the boss, it seems like who's going to do the teaching? Where yeah, the honor is.
Well,
That's what I'd
yeah,
rather
that's my
do. But yeah,
right. There's a large school district near where I am, and they said that they were $18 million short, so they were going to have to cut teachers. They weren't going to be able to hire any more teachers or something like that.
Oh
And then
boy.
they discovered that they had over $100 million, and they were still going to cut the teachers, and they were going to hire more administrators. So,
Oh.
and the teachers union was furious, and there's kind of a fight going on right now, but they're not going to win. So,
The teachers won't win.
right. So,
Ugh.
because admin wants more administrators.
well,
And
ironically enough, there was the same thing going on in the medical community. Um, up on one of the major hospitals, they were talking about the cost of nursing and how it's just overwhelming them. They were paying doctors to be nurses, and they were paying them doctors' wages to be nurses. And they were saying that they had a shortage of
because
nurses.
there's
When I know they were
yeah.
letting go nurses, and yet they were also having doctors stand in for nurses and paying them doctors' wages, and crying that they had a big shortage of nurses. And it's like,
Well,
this is
isn't
very
their field and
strange.
the teacher field is suffering the same thing
Yeah,
where they're just losing
Right.
staff? They're just burnt out. They're tired. They're just
they're just
overworked and
Hmm.
they're
feeling
just
undervalued.
tired. They're just
Right.
and
crisp.
they're
They're just
leaving in
done.
higher
They're
numbers than
stressed.
ever before.
Mhm.
I've
And other
had
teachers
many
and other
people come up
nurses are
to me this year to
yeah.
tell me how stressed they were.
They just can't do it.
Yeah.
They can't do it. Yeah,
Well, the
and
last number
yeah,
I heard was before, I think in the last 3 years, it was 567,000 teachers have left.
yeah,
And that was through maybe last year.
yeah,
So I don't know how many are leaving this
yeah.
year.
Mm-hmm.
I know that where I work, there's a number of teachers who are leaving,
So the
Mm-hmm.
and
focus is
many
on
of
the
them haven't
cost.
even announced it yet.
Yeah, yeah.
So
There it is.
they're waiting to the last minute to announce.
And
Yeah,
not just retiring. I mean, because
Right,
that's right. They
yeah,
are choosing to leave
right,
yeah,
because they
rather
just
than like it's time to retire.
right, and because administration is simply. I was in a meeting where the admin said, well, here's another thing that we're going to have to do. And one person said, what are you taking off our plate? And they glossed right over it and refused to even acknowledge that. So people are fed up. And, but
mhm,
I believe that what
Tired.
very tired. And I think that something that they probably should do is probably just say a firm no. No, you give us something. They start negotiating. And I think teachers have to do that because I don't think the union's going to do that. I think that in these meetings, everybody just says no. But
Yeah.
you always have the people that are too afraid to say that they're going to cave in. But let's get back to our topic.
I had to go roundabout a little bit.
Well,
Just a wee
it
bit.
does say something about the disconnect. I think that a lot of teachers, they have their ear to the ground, and if you're a good teacher, as we've spoken of, you've developed the relationships, and you do know that the testing is both excessive and in many cases irrelevant to the experience that the kids are going through. And yet they keep on going through it because it's administrated. And that's
Mhm.
also workload. And that's also a kind of a demoralizing stress for both you and the student. And it grinds you down. And so
Right.
this testing goes on and on and on. And there's an irrelevance to it. And the irrelevance
Well,
is it doesn't actually apply to the student's learning. It only applies to the assessment of something we're not quite sure is tangible. We're not sure how it applies. It used to kind of apply, but now it just applies to the fact that it's being tested. There's some innocuous thing that's being tested now, but it's become its own thing. And when it's done 7 times a year, that's how you know it's become its own thing.
Well,
right.
that
We had students who, well, we just find out, that these tests are going to be coming
Mhm.
on
mhm.
Or
X
not.
day, and they just sort of raise their ugly head, and it's kind
Right.
of like, okay. But for teachers of those students, they have no idea. And so they, what do you do? Because the kids are
Yeah.
absolutely drained from taking these tests
Mhm.
Mhm.
because they're stuck in these rooms and they come out and then they're expected to continue with their day.
Right.
Um,
What does it assess? Their
and
ability to not get frustrated?
who knows? And
Yeah.
I have a group of students who said, okay, I'll go in and take them. And they're back 45 minutes later. It's like, wait, what did you do? Just went through and I just marked the bubbles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just did
right.
it. So you're not getting an accurate
Nope.
count
Right.
on that because the students don't take it seriously anymore simply because they feel they've been over tested. They don't see the relevance in it. And then what's going to happen is the district is going to say, you need to explain to your students what the relevance is and how important this is.
And then
And
that's a
and it
hard
does
thing to
absolutely
explain.
nothing.
And
Right.
there's no importance to it. That's
There
the
is not.
that's the dilemma. I do you perhaps you'd explain to me the importance because as far as I'm concerned in my career, I was the first one to raise my hand and say, this is a bad thing. We will begin to teach to the test. Real learning will cease to exist. And sadly, I am correct. After all these years, like 20 years later, I was correct. Actually, it's 15 years later, I'm correct. Sadly.
Right. But well, here's my question then. let's say that we did away with all these tests. Let's
Yay! Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
let's say let's say that we shove away the ACT, the SAT, the Smarter Balance,
Yes.
all these different tests.
I could do it in a heartbeat.
Mhm.
How Okay, there needs to be some form of assessment though,
Yeah.
because
Teaching.
we need to make sure that the kids are learning.
Right. We need to
They're
measure their
learning.
education and
Right.
what they know,
Is
right?
it Do
It's
you
called
think that
teaching.
perhaps
Testing and assessment.
because they do make so much money off of these tests as they are, and everything has gone onto the computer lately,
Right.
that maybe they need to be paper pencil tests
There's
that
no
act
way
where they're
to
going to
do
have
that.
to, I mean, they make enough money, they can hire people to score these tests, correct? So my way of thinking is have have maybe a buffet of methods for the student to have in order for
Mhm.
them to figure out what the best format would be for them to demonstrate how they are how well they can do on these different areas. So for example, for writing, um, have them write but not type. Some kids might be better just using a pencil and paper, and allow them to do that. For reading, you're throwing things at them and they're already tired, and it's really hard on the eyes as well for them to be reading the text on the computer, and then you're asking them all these other questions. Do you think that Here's a thought just entered my mind. Do you think that when we went from paper tests to computer tests, do you think that there is some sort of correlation as to when test scores started going down?
Could be a little bit, but
Couldn't tell you.
I mean, when you were saying like let's go back to paper, then I was just thinking of all the kids who struggle with, with their handwriting and, dysgraphia, and if they
Well,
are
they
they
could
still being
type. They would
yes.
still be able to do that on the computer then if that's what they needed to do.
Yeah, I like the idea, and that goes back to some of the things we had talked
Yeah.
about in earlier episodes about, universal UDLs, right? Offering different
Right.
ways for students to demonstrate
Exactly.
their learning, because
Yeah.
that's what standardized tests do. They only are really, I mean, a big argument is that they only are determining the students that are good at taking tests and
Right.
and that are not influenced by
Or
outside factors. Like they're
right.
not hungry, they aren't stressed, they react
Hmm.
well to timed exams. So if you have all those
Or yeah.
components and those work for you, that then you tend to perform better. And then there's a whole other statement of that they are, like we talked about at the beginning, that there's bias in them.
Well,
And so that
from a
is
constructivist point of view, some kids, some people just don't grasp concepts till after the test is long gone in their life. It's just a way that you're growing and learning and evolving. So it's a snapshot in time for everybody, but not everybody's at that moment in time. So you're making an assessment that is not realistic for everybody. It's just not a
Right. You're talking about
realistic
learning
point of view.
maturity.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just as you're going along, constructivism, you're building upon building, and not everyone's at the same level at the same time. So you take that
Well, no, that's
snapshot
what
at the age
makes
of
our world.
16. Exactly. It's a false picture. And we're trying to go, what's the best way to assess this? None. There's really no good way to assess 16 years old for a human being. So I think of the relationships. You said, what can we do without these tests? And I thought, just what we used to do. I mean, I knew what student I had and where I wanted them when I released them out of graduation, and I always felt good when I did it. I knew where they were
Hmm.
at, and the test never entered my mind. To me, it was like I felt confident they were able to read and express themselves, and that they were mathematically competent. And go forward and now let the world kick your butt, kid. But I feel good enough
Right.
to know you can do your thing. Yeah,
Right. Well, I think math is a much more concrete and tangible kind of
yeah,
conceptual matter that they can do that.
yeah,
I think that you still need to be able to have a method for them to be able to demonstrate how they work something out
Exactly.
um, on the,
That might be an
on
assessment
the
worth it, like
paper.
problem solving assessments or problem solving skill
Hmm.
assessments, something like that. That might be a worthy way
Right.
to do it. Yeah.
But even if I'm taking a test and I can't talk, and I kind of, if I'm confronted with a problem, I like to, there's a different way for me to problem solve.
Like sound it out or like kind of read
Yeah,
it out loud. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I kind of go through, sometimes I need to pace it out. And so, but none of these tests allow for any of that.
Mm-mm. Unless
Yeah.
you get,
So,
predetermined accommodations, and then but then you need documentation. But yeah, for most
yeah.
people, just be able, because that we do that with our kids all the time. Hey, read this essay out loud, and then they start reading in their own words, right? And also they're like, that doesn't sound right. I'm like, that's right. We
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
strategy that we have our kids do. Um, so to take that strategy away is hard.
Oh, yeah.
Um, there is another thing that I think Philip said at the beginning, and I was just kind of doing some reading about this right before, and it's talking about how the test is based on, you have to have a familiarity with, what was the quote? You have to have, the questions rely on background knowledge that's more often held by white middle class students. So it's
Mhm.
not just that the designers have unconscious racial bias, but the testing industry depends on these kinds of questions in order to create a wide range of scores. And so they gave some examples, like one question asked about, you had to describe the qualities of someone who would deserve a quote key to the city. And a lot of the students don't know what that meant. What
No.
is a key to the city? Whereas wealthy kids would be more familiar with the keys to the city. Um, and so and then those are also the population of students that have the resources to do test prep, and they can
Right.
get tutoring, and they can afford to take the test multiple times.
Hmm.
And so
Mhm.
the quote was, these tests are a better measure of a student's family background and their economic status than it is actually on their ability to judge what they know.
Exactly.
That was from Eloy Oakley's commentary on standardized tests rewards kids for wealthy families, from just saying, just doing my research.
Well,
Again,
good for
yeah, it
you.
was appealing to
I know.
the wealthier and the upper middle class, those that were actually going to the university. Yeah.
Right. And those are, and then kind of also what you were saying, Tony, earlier about like when we have to explain to kids, why do they want to take these tests? Well, for a lot of them, they're like, I'm not going to college. Why am I vested in this? So therefore I'm going to make a pattern with my bubble letters. Or if it's on the
Yeah.
computer, right? We've had kids who are like, I just press C every time. I'm like, great.
I just press
Right.
C every
How
time.
did you,
Oh,
they
wow.
did. I'm like, how did you finish this test in 10 minutes? C, 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 C,
You know,
C.
I had a
strangely
Okay.
enough,
student.
the same
Yeah.
story happened in the '60s. You know, when the United States was just ripping the world up and everything, but they weren't doing well in tests, and there was just a conundrum. And they researched it, and they found out that American kids were doing the same things. They didn't take the test seriously, and they were just pushing
Yep.
buttons randomly.
There
They were
it is.
filling in bubbles or whatever it was. Yeah.
Hmm. I had a middle school student whose father was a university professor. The kid was very, very bright, but his test scores were, they were, let's say, subpar. And the reason was because that's exactly what the kid would do, because he couldn't take those tests seriously. And they begged him and begged him to take them seriously, and he just didn't want to. So you've also got those variable factors, because after a while, students do not want to take those tests.
Nope.
They feel as though they're being judged. They feel that it's just silliness. And
Yeah.
in many ways, it really is. What about um,
Yeah.
maybe a better gauge of growth? Because aren't we supposed to be gauging growth through these tests?
Yeah, I
If we're
mean, we're
taking
trying to
so many
have,
of,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because we're doing them year over year. And so aren't they going to be looking at how well they did in the past and then build up sort of like a platform? So it would seem to me that there might be something that might more easily take care of that. That might be more equitable.
I know it's so hard because we need an objective way to determine if students are learning, where are there maybe some areas of improvement, right? And so there's got to be a way to gauge that. But on the flip side, having a one style fits all where it seems to just fit this certain socioeconomic
Mm-hmm.
tends to favor the wealthy, tends to favor the white. English is their first language. So that doesn't seem to be the best way right now. And you're right, it's a
Right.
humongous business.
And they're throwing second language students into these tests and then
Right.
recording them as though they were part of the regular language population.
Right. It's just
And
crazy to think that one test on one date is therefore a barometer for how they are doing for their entire, 10th grade year or their 11th grade year.
right, and they were also talking in this book about how draconian they are about every student needs to be tested and you need to have proof that your child is not going to be able to do it. And they went after these parents, and the parents said, no, our kid can't do it. My kid is in a coma and
Oh, jeez.
won't actually be able to do this. And the state came after them.
No, that's no
And
lie.
it was,
That's no lie. Yeah,
it's absolutely amazing
it was
at
pretty rabid. Yeah.
what they're doing. And what can we do in order to reverse course on this and change it so that we can have something that the students have a buy-in to that actually is meaningful for them, because this is supposedly for the students. If it's for the corporate heads of the districts and for the states, then quit using the kids as your pawns.
Well, yeah, it was tied to funding, as you recall, with No Child Left Behind, and so they were
Right.
shutting schools down, which were
Yeah.
making which were overburdening other schools, and then setting up political battles, which were setting other schools down because they were losing
Mhm.
services, and then the money was getting moved, and then and as we know, the administrations were taking up the funds. It was just like
Mhm.
the snake was eating
There was a lot
itself
of
by the
corruption.
tail. Yeah, and so like
So
like
you
you
would
said, it was supposed to say help the kids by making the schools better, but what it did was it penalized schools in general, but and it never rewarded.
right.
That was the whole behind all this is just the stick. It's always just the stick. It's like you started out by saying, it's like, well, we have to cut teachers. What? We found more money? We still have to cut teachers, but we're going to get more administrators.
And that'll help the kids.
And that helps the kids.
Um,
Yeah.
right.
I don't know how
No,
you find, quote, quote, discover how much $100 million. Like, how does that happen? That's
That's in the
amazing.
couch cushions.
I just lifted this rock and here's a pile of money. Yay.
oh,
Can
I thought that was
Oh,
Monopoly money.
I know, but that's just bizarre.
I thought that was
Well, it's
money. It's real money.
well, it's a game. I mean, state governments have played that in the past when they try to pass tax bills, and then they say, "Oh, look, we found all this extra money, so we don't need to cut all these different pieces." It's you would think. Here's the interesting thing. In Oregon, we have so-called equitable funding, where we give the schools the same funding. So every school is funded the same way with the same formula, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
However, and then if you look at it, it's equitably funded. I mean, this white school over here in this wealthy part of town gets the same funding as the black school over here in this other part of town. However, eventually you will find that they are almost 15% underfunded in the black community, in the poorer schools, than they are in the white community. And
Yeah.
part of and
Yeah.
because they don't have the infrastructure, they allow those schools to crumble. We need to look at maybe what we need to look at in those areas is doing more work on emotional poverty and some of the poverty logistics and work on working with people. But what we did in South America was students who are graduating had to go to different parts of the community, and they had to teach reading. They had to go in there and they had to work
Oh,
on the literacy rate. They had to work on math, and they had to put in X number of hours of actual work. They couldn't get out of it. And all the wealthy kids all had to do it. Every high school senior had to do
yeah,
this work. And it was a program that they called Alphabetación. And it was really, really a well thought out program. There was some moaning and complaining about it, but the
right.
kids did it. And I believe it was quite successful and the literacy rate went up.
Nice.
Imagine
So
that.
yeah. So why can't we have the students who seem to be doing so much better work with the students who go into the inner city and work with some of those students and actually do some work where they need to be able to show signs of improvement, do some extra work. And no, you can't get out of it because mommy and daddy want to pay somebody off. But by the same token, we still have this problem with standardization and
Hmm.
I mean, it's like a steamroller. So how do you
Or
stop the
change
wheel
it.
from
Yeah.
turning so that it, instead of having this one, a steamroller has that one great big wheel that kind of
Yep.
goes and it just crushes everything in sight.
Yeah.
What if we had different kinds of bicycle wheels on there and each one was different? Maybe one of them has wheels that have like the little fluttery wisps of whatever, and one has like the cards
I want mine
that
with a
make it go
baseball
clickety
card in it.
clack as it goes. Yeah. And one is just regular, but it's got
Yeah.
spinner kind of
Yeah.
things like you might see on
Sounds like a
different
Dr.
cars.
Seuss. I'm picturing like a Dr. Seuss
Well,
bike wheel.
but
That's true.
every one of those would talk about it would help with diversification of testing and working with students that might actually be able to, let's say, intellectually prosper
Hmm.
by taking a test that reflected them.
Well, let's
Yeah.
redefine the whole target of what is the goal of high school? What's
That
the purpose of it?
Well,
Maybe it's time we
so
looked at
let's
that
look
Well,
too.
the
at
As a
purpose
what's
of the
panel.
testing, right? The purpose
Yeah,
of the
no,
the
testing.
purpose of the testing
but
is to assess what we're testing is what high school, what the education is getting, what we're going for, right? What the goal
we're
is.
starting
So what is the
pre-K, Philip.
goal?
It's not
Yeah,
just high school. So
I
what's the
know.
purpose of education?
Right. What's the purpose of the education system? What is it we want from our students at the end of 12 years of this sucker?
What do
Are
we
we
want
still,
from our
is it still
children?
the same thing? Should we reassess that? I mean, just saying.
I I think maybe
Yeah.
we need to get a coalition of people together who want to look at what is the actual purpose of our educational system.
Hmm.
Exactly. Are we testing for
Because
something that's long gone? I don't know.
oddly enough, even where I work, we have people who say that's all about compliance. We need to teach compliance. And if our students are not compliant, then they are not good people
Well, then good
because
luck.
Yeah,
and
that's not.
well,
It's
it's
like a
very
robot,
well,
unfortunately.
exactly, but these are people in alternative education.
Oh boy.
And
They're people in
they don't
society.
they say this very quietly, but they're working towards that, and they don't say it to the right people. They say it out over a period of time, and then how things kind of start
Do
leaking
they
and all
not
of a
think
sudden you
that
start realizing.
these students are people? Do they think that somehow children don't have human rights? That compliance isn't an
um
oppressive way to treat a human? Because if you try to get compliance from me, the first thing you're going to get is rebellion.
right, right. And so they're trying to push down rebellion from kids. I mean,
And they'll
they
get
fail
more
to realize
rebellion. I'm
But
sorry.
they fail to realize that this is how we were when we were that age,
Yeah, it's
weren't
funny how
we?
you become an adult and you forget how you were. Why did they become teachers? I'm sorry, I'm getting personal with this. That's they should have become adults and stayed adults. Why did they become somebody who relates with children and young adults for a profession when they can't remember what it was like?
Well,
Anyway,
oddly enough, I think a lot of teachers forget what it's like to be.
exactly.
They want to be professional, and so they have the stiff upper lip, they have the stiff back, and they just kind of go through it.
Mm,
And they believe that in order for them to learn with for their students to learn, that they need to kind of crack into it and get there. There are also teachers who believe that they build a community. So there can be laughter, there can be fun, there can be play, and
Yeah.
we are able to get things done with the students. And there are many people who frown upon that
Mhm.
yeah,
because they don't
insisting
see
upon
that as
compliance.
actually teaching.
Yeah,
But we were also children and we were also students,
yeah.
and many of us were very rebellious. And anybody who wasn't as rebellious as maybe they should have been, I don't know. I don't know. I think rebellion is a healthy thing.
Well, I think
It
So
insisting
would you
it
upon compliance is not a way to approach anybody. You know, you cooperate with people. And there are boundaries, and if someone gets to a point where they cross it, that's something. And you go, hey, we got a problem. But you go, hey, and you will be compliant is just saying I've got authority and there's a wall. That's authoritarian, not authoritative.
right,
Yeah. And you
right.
need to be
But I
authoritative.
think sometimes you have to look at the rebellion, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's really creative,
Oh,
and sometimes it's just awesome. And you
it
kind of,
is.
I mean, I look. Let me. Okay, don't be offended by this, but I'm going to take my dogs. Sometimes my dogs, sometimes my dogs become really rebellious, and they do something because they want to get my attention. And I had a dog, and what he used to do was he would sit there and he would be lying down, and then his eyes would start going back and forth. And I could tell that something was going on with him. And then he would quietly get up and he would walk out of the room. And the next thing I would hear dishes and pots and pans clatter all over the kitchen floor. He would open up the cupboards and he would start grabbing them and just throwing them down because he knew that that would make me run in. So, and then I would go running in, and then he would sit there and he'd have this big smile on his face and he would dart and go outside because I couldn't catch him. So, I mean,
that's a smart little pup.
oh, yeah. So, what ended up happening was I had to laugh because I couldn't be angry
Yep.
because no sense in it. It was futile to be angry. You just have to laugh at it and, and look for the positives in that whole thing.
Oh yeah.
The positives of how intelligent he was, the positives that he really wanted my attention. And so that's what he got. But I wanted it to be positive attention. And so, it started to decrease, except for when I got ultra busy, and then it would increase again. So,
Mhm.
um,
I had a student do
but
that just yesterday. He was he was really
he
smart.
went in the
He just did something. I go, "Oh, this kid's really smart. I gotta watch his." He
Yeah.
insulted. He goes, so "What's your first name?" And I go, "Mister." He goes, "Well, Mister, you should get out of the profession." He was a
Oh,
fourth grader. What? You're good.
oh boy. That's funny.
wow.
But
He's
sometimes that
But
actually
cleverness doesn't come across on a standardized test, right? See how I'm swinging it back?
no,
exactly. I
no,
go, "Oh,
because it's
this
all
kid's
black and white. It's
smart."
all just
Right.
numbers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think students don't want to be seen as a number.
No. I could tell that right
And
away.
that's
This
why
kid
we
does
teach
not wanna be
alternative
seen that
ed.
way, yeah.
But
Exactly.
that's why we're in alternative ed, because they're no longer just a cog in the wheel.
Hmm.
They're actually something that is made up of cogs and wheels and
Right.
whatever, and that they are an entity unto themselves, and we respect them and we treat them like that.
When you have to
And
fill in
do
your
these
number
tests
and
do
then
the
the
same thing
bubbles
though?
that indicate your number, it's kind of an insult to have to know your number and then fill in the bubbles to fill in that number too. Like every year, it's kind of, no one wants to be
Okay,
a number.
so
Yeah.
no.
No.
So let me ask you then, what do we have solutions?
We need to look at it, don't we? I mean, like, what is it we're assessing, and maybe we should reassess that.
Maybe
Um,
we need to redefine.
Assess the assessment.
yeah,
Maybe we need to go back to having competencies
yeah,
and
that
figuring
was,
out ways to do
yeah,
that and do proficiency and testing, or start looking at how we actually score things. And I think that's what's coming up with equitable grading
yeah, I
Hmm.
and
like that
grading
idea.
equity. I was hoping to have a group from the State Department come in and talk about um, grading with equity, and they are unable to because apparently they had to go through several different channels, and it became just incredibly bureaucratic for them to be
Oh,
able to come on and just talk about what the policy is, et cetera. So
Yeah,
that got a big kibosh, and isn't going to happen. So we will be talking about grading equity eventually. And I was hoping that they would take care of that kind of component for us. But if we changed how we test, but also what we're testing, and by what we're testing, I don't mean that we're not testing reading, writing, and arithmetic,
right.
but that we are
hmm,
testing thinking, thinking processes and communication,
problem skills
and looking
or
and
problem
and
solving
looking
skills.
at those.
Yeah,
Yeah, because if it, okay, so Christy, you're going to go to work for Intel, and
Oh,
I don't think that they really care about whether or not you can find the imagery in William Faulkner's story. Um,
that's probably
right.
true.
I'm
That's true.
it might come up, and but I think that they would be more interested in problem solving. I think
Yeah,
most businesses would be more interested in problem solving.
exactly.
Right.
Whether it's business, even in teaching, problem solving, how do you take care of those things?
Yeah,
I think that if you can, maybe testing can be fun to see how long it takes somebody to figure out some puzzles and just put some things together. Because I think that having brain elasticity and being able to bend your brain and manipulate things, that's better
Right.
than having to do many of these other concepts. And I think it makes it for a more readily available group of people for the workforce, but it also makes people far more interesting.
Agree. I like it.
And but then how do we do that? Do we
That's
put
a
that on a piece of paper and then we
that's
have
another
to?
quote. That's a we're just gonna end it right there. You figured it all out. All done now. La 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 la.
how do we assess
I
that?
only wish. But if they can, because you can, because if you're going to put puns in, if you're going to do things, kind of like escape room has clues that are probably
Hmm.
kind of cryptic. By a certain age, maybe there's something that's in the clue that has something to do with some kind of reading that the students should have had so far, that maybe it could refer to some kind of text that by that point in time they should have had in the reading canon, or I don't know. But there are different ways of knowing, because background knowledge and all the subtext is what we really need to look at. So I don't know.
The time has come to perhaps
Yeah, it's
assess whether or not we want our business managers to be well versed in Faulkner and
oh snap.
Hemingway and Thoreau. Whether that's
Well,
really
I'm not.
truly important, I don't know. It's truly actually a good question. Is it that important that we explore literature as in depth as we have in the past 150 years, or do we kind of release some
Oh,
of that and move
definitely.
into different things? I don't know. I
Well,
just because I
actually,
did.
yes.
Do we move
Well,
forward? I don't know.
I believe that literature kind of takes us away. and it kind of calms
yeah.
the mind.
Oh,
And it
it's
allows you
no
to
doubt.
envision, it allows you to do
Yeah.
all sorts of things. And I think you need that. In fact, it's almost like an SEL exercise,
Oh, I mean, I could
social
argue for it
emotional
myself.
learning.
I teach it like crazy, but is it time we looked at it and went, maybe we don't study it as much as we used to? I don't know. I'd like to, maybe everything's on the table in these days.
Yeah,
Well,
like
Shoot,
a
I don't
complete
know.
except,
overhaul.
well,
Yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with it because
Well, I don't either.
I believe that we have a culture where we're very visual and people are
True.
constantly playing games.
Maybe instead of place of
And
literature, we go into
maybe
filmmaking,
and
stories through
game playing
filmmaking. Or, yeah.
game playing should be tested, don't you think?
Yeah. Game
Because they
playing.
have to do tons of problem solving when
Right.
they're
And
playing their
game
games,
theory
correct?
is a big thing. Game
Yes.
theory is becoming a big sociological sort of economic theory. So game
hmm
playing and problem solving through games should become curriculum. You're right. Yeah.
Maybe
Hmm.
maybe the kids need to be tested on economics. Maybe they should be tested
Yes.
on personal finance.
Well,
Yeah.
definitely, because there's a lot of myths out there that are just outrageous that are believed like nobody's business.
hmm So what I'm thinking is that we need to make the test relevant, first
Mm.
of all. Secondly, take it away from the grade schools. I mean, for crying out loud, when do these kids get to be kids and make decisions on their own based on what they want to do, rather than parents wanting them tested in
Mm.
order to be thrown into a school and having their entire life regimented because, well, this is what mom and dad want you to do. And who knows? I've
Mm.
had parents who didn't know what they wanted to have their kids do, and they wanted their kids to be happy, and the kids couldn't figure out what they wanted to do. I
Right.
think
Takes a while.
so, but I
Yeah.
think that parents play an integral role in helping the child develop and start to figure out what they need, but not all parents can do that. Some people just look at the money and that's all they want to do.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Some people actually have some interest a lot, but think of how many times people change careers in their lives. I mean, I've gone through 3 or 4. So,
Yeah.
do we all really know what we want to be when we grow up?
Well, it'll
When do
change,
we
right?
grow up?
Yeah.
Ah,
Well,
there you go.
well, I figured that I'm done growing when I'm dead, but
There it is.
um we have okay, I think we're just kind of going in circles at this point. But these are I love this discussion. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So how about you, the listener, you give us a review and you subscribe and you give us an idea of what you think we should do about standardized testing. And aside from trashing it, give us your thoughts. Let us know where you're thinking, and do hit that subscribe button. And I guess we will see you again next week with another episode. So until then, good night, Philip.
Aloha.
Goodbye, Christy.
Goodbye.
Okay, and for me, adios. Ciao.